We'll give it a couple minutes before we start. Hope everyone is doing well. Before we get down to tonight's topic, I just want to draw attention to my new Jewish accessory, my voted button sticker. Here in Florida, it's very easy to vote early. And if you have been considering it, please might want to consider it more seriously. It's just an easier way to speed up things for the way our elections work. If you're wondering why that's considered a particularly Jewish activity, Judaism has long had a form of democracy. Before we had Israel in 1948, there was no Jewish sovereignty on any land, and yet we still had self-regulating towns, councils, and communities around the world, and they functioned under a form of what I like to call soft democracy. There weren't formal constitutions. There weren't always formal elections, yet people tended to be promoted by the acclaim of their communities to be in positions that had some authority to try and make decisions. So it is a tradition that we are well familiar with for about 1,500 years. And even prior to that, when we had the time of our kings, the kings were also limited by the Sanhedrin, by the court. They were limited by the Torah. Of course, the king was not above the laws that God had given, but was meant to implement them. And if the king failed to do so, it was not uncommon for the people to turn against him. So we do have a long idea that those who are in power are not above the law. Those who are in power are responsible and answerable to the people. And thankfully, we live in a time now where Jews in most countries that they live can participate actively in shaping the government that they have. And as we have been the victims of governments for many, many centuries, it is nice to be able to participate and hopefully prevent persecution not only of ourselves, but of any others. So if you're not voting, you're not doing it right. If you have trouble voting, then hopefully you've looked into the alternatives of either by ballot, like I mentioned, early voting, or other forms of absenteeism. So just want to reiterate that is very much a Jewish value. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I am going to tell you that you need to do your homework and eventually make a decision, contribute to the guidance and governance of whatever country you are in, and continue to take advantage of this great freedom, liberty, and blessing that we now enjoy in the modern world. If you live somewhere where you're not allowed to vote, then my sympathy to you, and hopefully either your country or your address will change, and you'll be able to be in a place that has more freedom and allows you to have more of a contribution to what happens. So, without further ado, let's talk about one of the ultimate choices that people can make. That is the choice to get married or the choice to be unmarried, to get divorced. So we've talked a little bit about life cycles in the past, but these two elements tend to occupy an inordinate amount of time and focus within many people's lives. And so we need to go over them a little bit more carefully than in the past. So let me just get my various tech forms distributed. Oh, Loretta, good to hear you as well. Thanks for joining us through YouTube. And let me start scrolling through the slides. In the old days, that is to say, back before there was even a Torah, Rambam Maimonides teaches us, before the giving of the Torah, it would be that if a man happened upon a woman in the marketplace and they wanted to marry each other, he would bring her into his house and consummate the marriage between them privately, and she would be his wife. Basically, he would say, do you want to? She would say, yeah. They'd go back to the house. they would have sex, and that was a marriage, right? Two people choosing to be together and demonstrating the choice to be together through their physical intimacy. That was it. No witnesses, no documentation, just that. Once the Torah was given, Israel was commanded that if a man wanted to marry a woman, he would acquire her first through witnesses, and afterwards she would be his wife. As it says, when a man takes a woman and sleeps with her, right? So he is focusing very much on a almost literal reading of this verse, that first comes the taking, and again, taking in this sense is the better maybe captured by the English word acquire, to have an agreement with. Obviously, a person cannot legally take a woman to be his wife against her will, but when they have agreed that they will be husband and wife, then they are permitted to engage in intimacy together. It is not the other way around. We'll come back to that intimacy question as far as creating the bond a little bit later. But Rambam is trying to explain that the Torah has given us a set of rules, a set of ceremonies to go through to allow us to move beyond just the casual intimacy of the past into something that is more formalized and more sanctified. It's important to keep in mind that when we talk about ceremony, I know many people imagine an hour to 3 hour long weddings and other such ordeals. That is not the essence of a Jewish wedding. And most Jewish weddings are not longer than even half an hour, unless there is a lot of additional information or additional elements being added. But the essence of a Jewish marriage can be done in about 5 minutes. So ceremony here does not mean ceremony, doesn't mean spending $50,000, $100,000. It means having a structure to the activity that is about to occur. Much like other aspects of Judaism as well. Saying a blessing before you eat adds ceremony to eating that would otherwise be missing, but that doesn't mean the ceremony is especially long or involved. And Jewish ceremony for getting married is actually very, very short, and hopefully you'll see also very inspiring for how it moves us from one state of our life into a next. So that was the old days. Nowadays, what does it look like? Well, there are two main sections to a wedding. There is erusin, which is also called kiddushin, and nisuin. Now, up until different parts of the Middle Ages in different communities, these two were separate events. That is to say, erusin would be conducted, there would be a long pause, months or a year, and then nisuin would be brought as its final conclusion. Nowadays, however, in almost any ceremony you are going to go for a Jewish wedding, you will see them back to back, meaning that there will be no interruption between the two as far as leaving the site or exiting the chuppah, the wedding canopy. And I'll break these down each in their own way. But before you even get to the chuppah, we have to do a few other things. One is the ketubah. The ketubah is a document. It is a legal promissory note. It is presented, accepted, and witnessed before the ceremony itself begins. And in it, it outlines that there are financial obligations from the groom and the groom's estate towards his bride. The rabbis instituted this in addition to the other aspects of Torah involved in marriage, because they knew that when a woman was getting married, in the ancient world in particular, she was often leaving behind her family's means of support to go and live with her husband. If he were to divorce her, more on that later, she would then be left with nothing. And so the rabbis of more than 2,000 years ago said, before she gets married, he has to provide a promissory note, a lien against his property, that should he divorce her, or if he dies, that she would have the right to claim that value from his estate. The passing was important as well because under ancient Torah law, the woman did not inherit from her husband. The woman did not inherit from him because land was held according to tribal affiliation, and tribes kept the land within the tribe. And your tribal affiliation was a patrilineal descent. So the ketubah has to be taken care of before. If anybody is getting married, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to conduct you through the way to get a ketubah and to have it completed correctly. There is also usually the ceremony known as bedekin. Bedekin is where the groom will lower the veil over his bride before the ceremony itself begins. This is to parallel Rivka's lowering of her veil in Chayei Sarah when Rebecca, first meets Isaac. It says that she lowers her veil before encountering him person to person. And it's also meant to prevent Yaakov, Jacob's mistake, when he married Leah rather than Rachel. And so this way, the groom knows who's under the veil before she is presented at the chuppah. We don't want to make a mistake there. There is also a tradition, a custom in some communities for the bride to circle the groom as she is preparing to come under the chuppah. The origins of this custom are pretty unclear, and what it's meant to represent are also unclear. There are many different traditions and explanations, but anyone who tells you they have the only correct version simply has not looked outside of their own customs and community. So it is sometimes interpreted as the bride coming in and moving into her husband's sphere, his orbit, if you will. Others see it as a step to ward off evil spirits, the idea being that when the woman was entering, she would circle him in order that the evil spirits would be confused with her trail and not follow. Indeed, that idea as well in non-Jewish communities, that evil spirits might be lurking behind the bride, is why the tradition in many European countries evolved for the groom to carry the bride over the doorstep into the house. It was in order to throw them off the scent. There are many different texts that show up in our tradition that as justification or explanation. These are certainly not the origin texts, but they are texts from which people can draw meaning. So in particular, in Jeremiah 31:21, it is said, a woman encompasses and protects a man, and with her going around him, it is almost as though she is establishing that shield around him. And then Hosea 2:21 and 22, there are three different mentions to betrothal. And of course, we also have the story of the Battle of Jericho, which is why different communities will have 3 circles or 7 circles around the groom. In some egalitarian weddings I have seen, the bride and groom will take turns circling each other, but circling is not a custom that needs to be included by any measure. If it is not something that is important to you, your family, and your family's history, I personally do not suggest it be added, but if it is part of your traditions and part of your family, by all means continue. There was nothing wrong with the custom. Erusin. Now we get to the actual ceremony. Now we have the 2 people under the chuppah, which we discussed in the earlier life cycle class. And Erusin or Kiddushin, you can use them basically interchangeably, is the formal betrothal, the formal engagement. It is symbolized by the man offering a token with some worth and the woman's acceptance of that token. This act binds the 2 together, and they are bound together in such a degree that they would need a divorce. They would need to do the second part of our class tonight if they were going to separate and not conclude the marriage. And if they were to be unfaithful, it would be considered adultery from this point onwards. Now, like I mentioned, this happens in a modern wedding ceremony at the beginning, and we continue through to the second half very directly. But in the ancient world, there would be a pause between this and the conclusion of the wedding. So knowing that there would need to be a divorce if they chose not to continue, knowing that adultery would be possible if one was to be unfaithful, was very important to have in mind. So too, just as it includes responsibilities, it does not include privileges, meaning that the man and woman would not be allowed to be together in an intimate way as husband and wife until they reach the conclusion of the wedding ceremony. So this really can be thought of as kind of a super engagement, an engagement with more legal ramifications than the modern system for most people. Like I mentioned, though, this happens under the chuppah. Young Jewish couples nowadays will get engaged in sort of conformity to Western culture. That engagement has no standing under Jewish law. Once that has taken place, once the erusin has begun, there is a blessing that is recited over a cup of wine, and the translation is as follows. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and given us commandments concerning forbidden relations, and has forbidden unto us those who are merely betrothed, meaning at this point I'm not allowed to be intimate, and permitted to us those lawfully married to us through chuppah and kiddushin, through the elements of the wedding ceremony. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who sanctifies your people Israel through chuppah and kiddushin, through these major elements of the Jewish wedding. So as you can see, we are thanking God for giving us commandments which guide us even in our most intimate of relationships. And God and religion and Judaism, its wisdom doesn't stop at the bedroom door. Its wisdom permeates our entire life. And the fact that there are limits, that there are people we can't marry, our close relatives, for example, or somebody who's married to someone else, gives a shape to the intimacy that we have that is a form of holiness, of sanctity. If it were to be simply do whatever you feel like, then without a contrast, without a distinction of who we can and who we cannot be with, then really the holiness that becomes a part of a marriage relationship would never fully materialize. There can be joy, there can be companionship, but the distinctiveness of a relationship is what contributes to its holiness. Now, I mentioned that erusin is marked by the giving of a token, and the groom presents this to the bride. Usually this is a ring, for example, one like this. The ring, according to Jewish law, does not contain stones, no diamonds, emeralds, and all of that. And that is entirely to make sure that the bride is not tempted by a mistaken estimation of value. Meaning if she looks at something that's all shiny with big pretty rocks on it, she might estimate how much this is and think that what she is being offered is greater than what she will actually receive. Whereas something that is of a simple material will be more easily identifiable in its worth, and she'll know what she's getting. This can be seen as well as a metaphor for any good relationship, and certainly for any good marriage, that you are marrying the person. You're not marrying the tuxedo, you're not marrying the dress, you're not marrying the ring, you're not marrying the bank account, you are marrying the person. And make sure that it is the person you have estimated accurately, not the jewelry. But it does need to have some value. The groom does have to show that he is giving something to her, and therefore it has to be worth at least a pruta, which was the smallest coin in the ancient world. That means pretty much any ring that a person has today can be valid, but not something that is like a cigar band or the wrapper off a piece of chewing gum. It needs to be worth a little bit more than that. As Rambam said, the giving of the ring or other monetary gift is only one of 3 ways to initiate betrothal. Right? We talked about this in our very first slide, that in the old days there were other ways. The second is with a document. that states the same as the groom will say, "Behold, you are consecrated to me," according to the laws of Moses in Israel. That is not used very often. And we can talk about that in a second. But the third way is with intercourse, much like the old way. But when it goes with the phrase, "Behold, you are consecrated to me," etc. Now, this last form of betrothal is explicitly ruled out by the Sades as being licentious. Basically, nobody should ever treat their beloved in a way that makes their wedding mark be just a physical sexual act. Judaism has nothing wrong with the intimacy shared between two people who are monogamous to each other, but it's still not a proper marker as the beginning of that relationship in its formal holiness. And so it is not allowed according to Judaism, even if technically it would be a form. Now that second form, like I mentioned, the giving of a document with the writing on it, has simply failed to become common. In a pinch, if somebody needed to get married and had nothing that they could offer of value, it could technically be done with such a document. But in my years of experience, I've never even heard of a person needing to consider that, let alone actually doing so. Any questions or comments so far on this idea, or anything up to this point, I should add? All right. So in the modern world, it is common now where both the groom and the bride will receive rings. But when we are doing this, we have to make sure that we see that this is not a transaction, right? And it's not merely a casual gift. I could give a gift of a ring to a random person or a friend who happened to be a woman. That doesn't make it a marriage ring. Right? Instead, it has to have the formal declaration, "Behold, you are consecrated to me with this ring, according to the laws of Moses in Israel." However, historically, in order to make sure that it was very clear that it was being done for this done for this purpose and done as a pure gift for declaring this betrothal, the bride did not give anything in return, because that might have made it look like they were exchanging gifts. Right? I give you a gift, you give me a gift, we've traded. It is therefore not that I gave you it, it is that we traded one for the other, like any sort of bargain that might be happening at a swap meet. That is not the way that it is meant to be done. Thus, rather than have it done that way, for most of our tradition, the bride did not give anything in return. In the modern world, there are a couple of solutions for couples that would like to have a more egalitarian form. The first, and what I did at my own wedding and have done at most weddings, is to make a small pause and an explanation that the bride of her own choosing is giving a ring to the groom, and it is not done in exchange or in any way, shape, or form dependent upon what he has given her. This clarifies that what's happening here is not a transaction, but are two different, unrelated gifts being given, each in celebration of the marriage. The other thing to do is simply to have him wear a ring, whether or not it was given under the chuppah as well. The chuppah is lovely, and the ceremony there is, of course, important and moving, but the ring does not gain special magic powers simply by being given during the ceremony. If he would like to wear a ring, and if she would like him to wear a ring, that can be given at any point. It doesn't have to be done at exactly this point in their relationship, and that would be perfectly fine. And that also is a way that for those that have special rings with significance, but do not meet the criteria of Jewish law for a wedding ring, for example, a ring with stones in it, I often will say, simply give it or present it at a different time rather than during this one moment of the ceremony. And you can wear that ring with all the diamonds and rubies you want after the ceremony, but allow this moment to still be according to the laws of Moses and Israel. Nisuin. Moving on to part 2. And yes, it is just that quick in a modern ceremony. Nisuin, the second part of the process, comes next, but very often you will have readings from the ketubah or speeches by the rabbi or anyone else if they want to make the service much longer, in order to simply carry on a little bit of a reminder of the separation between the first half of the wedding and the second half of the wedding. Only takes a few minutes, but it gives a nice pause. Now, Nisuin itself is marked just officially by the recitation of the Sheva Brachot, of the 7 blessings. Other readings can be included, many often will, and those blessings can be offered by the officiant, usually a rabbi, or can be divided among honored guests. And yes, I did say usually. Technically, a person can get married without a rabbi. You need witnesses, but you technically do not need a rabbi. Now, I'm not trying to put myself out of work, and I would like to recommend that you at least consult with a rabbi because there are things that could be done wrong that would mean the wedding has not taken effect, has not established formally the marriage. So it's best not to do it on your own. But if you were trapped on the desert island with just you and some witnesses and your beloved, and you wanted to get married, yes, that could be arranged under those circumstances and be perfectly valid Jewishly. So important reminder just in general, there is nothing in Judaism that requires a rabbi except the giving of accurate knowledge. And even that can be mastered by lay people with enough training and investment of their time. We do not have magic powers. We do not bless things in a way different than another person blesses things. Should also point out that under Florida law, at the very least, and most other states are similar, but not all, a person does have to have a certain standing within the clergy or as a judge or other legal official to perform a wedding. Personally, I'm not fond of the fact that I have to act as an agent of the state. I believe that that is a violation of the separation between our religious institutions and our political institutions, but that's a whole nother conversation. So what are these 7 blessings? Well, they all begin the same as any of our other blessings. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. We start off with another blessing over another cup of wine. We use the same opening and then continue, who created everything for his glory. We are reminding ourselves that all of creation reflects God's glory, but in particular, blessing 3, we bless God as the creator of humanity. We're human and we have a special interest in how God made us. Because, number 4, God created man in his image, humanity in his image. Adam is a reflection of all of human beings, not only the masculine form, in the pattern of his own likeness, and provided for the perpetuation of his kind. You are blessed, Lord, the creator of man, or of humans. So again, there's a subtle statement being made here that God did not make each of us so that each of us would be made directly by God. God made the first people so that all people could be made by the previous people. This self-perpetuation of our species is actually quite miraculous and a blessing to how God created the entire world, that this would be able to continue without a new miracle occurring. Although certainly the beginning of life through human agency I consider to be miraculous at any point. Number 5, let the barren city be jubilantly happy and joyful at her joyous reunion with her children. Blessed are you, Lord, who makes Zion rejoice with her children. Zion here is being used as a stand-in for Jerusalem, and it's also being used as a stand-in for all of the people of Israel and for our hope of all of the people of Israel to experience joy. The wedding day is considered, according to Jewish tradition and Jewish teaching, as the happiest day of your life. And if you're ever planning a wedding and it feels like it's not going to be because of the stress, take a breath, re-examine your plans, find a way to simplify, recapture the joy rather than the spectacle. This is also reminding us that a wedding is something that the whole community is joyful for. It is not a purely private joy of the bride and groom, but it is something that all of Israel rejoices in when it occurs. Blessings 6 and 7 are a little longer. Let the loving couple be very happy, just as you made, speaking English, just as you made your creation happy in the Garden of Eden so long ago. Blessed are you, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and bride happy. So we are seeing that just as the first were brought together, Adam and Chava, as bride and groom back in the garden, and it is said by tradition that God officiated at their marriage, so too God makes the bride and the bridegroom happy at this moment too. And then the final blessing, we bless God as the one who created joy and celebration, bridegroom and bride, rejoicing, jubilation, pleasure and delight, love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. Right? We are thanking God for having created us in a way that we feel an attraction, a desire, a need to be together with another person. This pull is something that may seem difficult, and certainly if you're going through the dating scene, and certainly if you haven't found somebody with whom you wish to share your life, it is frustrating. But the fact that it creates this potential for this union to occur once people have found the one they wish to be with is something that we are grateful for. God could have made us like worms, and we just cut off an arm and grows a new person, and it would have been perfectly biologically possible. But we believe that the way God arranged it adds a certain element of joy and spiritual and psychological satisfaction through the pleasure, the delight, the companionship, the love, everything that goes through it. Indeed, we see it as being such an important moment that we use this as the metaphor. May there soon be heard, Lord our God, in the cities of Judea and the streets of Jerusalem, the sound of joy and the sound of celebration, the voice of a bridegroom and the voice of a bride, the happy shouting of bridegrooms from their weddings and of young men from their feasts of song. This is a metaphor for the ultimate state of redemption for Israel and the world, that perfect joy that can come with people coming together to be married should be a template for the perfect joy the world should feel when it comes together in peace. Blessed are you, Lord, who makes the bridegroom and the bride rejoice together. So technically that's it. You do the Hareat, you do the behold you are consecrated sentence with the giving of a gift and its acceptance. You do the 7 blessings and you're married. Like I said, it can easily be done in under 5 minutes, not counting time for filling in and witnessing the ketubah. But there are other traditions. One of the most famous, which has no legal standing at all within the Jewish tradition, is the breaking of a glass. This occurs at the end of the ceremony when a glass is broken, and that's usually seen as being the formal or next to formal ending of the ceremony. Now, why are we doing this? Well, even in our most joyous occasions, we should not forget that the world, our land, and our people are still in need of repair. Right? The world is still broken in so many different ways. To add a little gravitas to times when frivolity can lead us to forget this, the sages would shatter a costly glass, right? They would take and break something that was expensive in the ancient world to sort of remind people not to lose sight. On your wedding day, you should be 99% ecstatically happy and 1% still realistically understanding that the world is not perfect, despite the happiness you have at this moment. And the breaking of the glass was meant to just a little bring us back down to earth. Now, other traditions and interpretations have also been given, ranging from the biological to superstitious to homiletical. The breaking of the glass is fertile ground for numerous sermons and speeches. But really, the explanation that I gave at the top is the origin of the custom. Any questions or comments? All right, so immediately after the ceremony, we have a time known as yichud, and this is often overlooked in non-Orthodox communities, unfortunately. It is a time for the bride and groom to be left alone. It is so very common for the bride and groom to be swept from the chuppah straight into cocktails or photos or reception and not have a moment to enjoy just being husband and wife together. Regardless of how long they have been dating, regardless of how long they have been engaged, regardless of how long they've known each other, there is a special blessing that comes from that sweet, sweet moment right after the ceremony has concluded. So please talk to your rabbi. That's me. I will talk to you, but talk to your rabbi if someone else is officiating, and make sure that there is a time and a place right after the ceremony where you can go and privately just be together. It'll be the last private moment you have probably for a few hours as the rest of the celebration gets underway. Once the celebration happens, that's important too. The reception is not an inconsequential part. We consider it to be a sudat mitzvah, a mitzvah meal, a mitzvah feast, and therefore, when we attend, we have, as guests, a duty, and that is to make the bride and groom feel like they are royalty, feel like they are the center of the universe, and we have to encourage and impress them. We have to entertain them. We have to do everything we can to make this day feel the happiest day of their life. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go in for the $100,000 wedding. What it means is your guests should be focused on entertaining you more than you should be focused on entertaining your guests. I know that goes against the lavish displays that are common within the American structure, but trust me, you can have a modest reception that is still an absolute joy for both the bride and groom as well as the guests. There is also a custom to have a continued celebration for the week after the wedding, to continue to recite the 7 blessings, the Sheva Brachot, and to have them at new but smaller parties each day of the week. So think of this as the echoes of celebration. For those of you that are more familiar with your Tanakh, with your Bible, you'll know that when Jacob accidentally married Leah, Lavan said he had to finish the 7 days of the wedding feast before he could marry Rachel. So it goes back almost 3,000 years at the very least to have these continuing small echoes of the celebration, which should be much more modest and should still invite new people, maybe who couldn't attend originally, to have this ongoing celebration for that first week of time together. However, no matter how well a marriage begins, no matter how happy the celebration can be, sometimes it doesn't last. It doesn't work. And there are many different causes and problems that can arise, but Judaism has established all the way back in Deuteronomy that there is a way for a husband and wife to part company according to Judaism. Giving the short synopsis here, this is Deuteronomy chapter 24. A man takes a wife and possesses her. Again, possess is not meant to be anything like a possession, but to be intimate with her. And she does not find favor in his eyes because he finds something appalling about her. And he writes her a sefer kritut, a divorce document, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. Okay, so wait, hold on. There were a lot of different elements there which we're going to have to unpack. What does it mean she didn't find favor in his eyes? What does it mean that he found something appalling? What is this document that he is writing for her? I already mentioned that when he sends her away, according to Judaism, for at least the last 2,000 years, there has to be a settlement called the ketubah. But what's going on? We'll get to that in a second. But I want you to see she leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man, right? For her to remarry, and the husband as well, by extension, to remarry, is perfectly fine. There are some faith traditions out there that are not Jewish that either forbid divorce entirely or allow divorce, but do not allow a person to remarry. Judaism says that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says that divorce is absolutely fine in the right moment, and remarriage is also perfectly fine. Then, in Deuteronomy, it tells us that it might happen that the later man rejects her. Maybe he divorces her too, writes her a sefer kritut, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. Or perhaps that man that she married dies. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her to be wife again, since she has been defiled, just the term used for having intimacy with a man other than that other man, for that would be abhorrent to Adonai. This is to prevent a sort of legal and serial form of adultery. But basically, if a man divorces the woman and they wish to remarry, that's fine. If a man divorces the woman, she marries someone else and then divorces or is widowed, she cannot remarry the first husband. That comes up very, very rarely. I think Elizabeth Taylor may have been the last time I heard about it in a popular form, but that is just something to be aware of. So what is this appalling thing? What is this favor in his eyes? When does divorce happen? Well, according to the Mishnah, and then discussed more in the Talmud, Beit Shammai, the great school of thought, said, no man shall divorce his wife unless he found in her unchaste behavior, as it is stated, the passage we read, because he found in her ervat davar. Now, I translated that as appalling behavior, and you'll see why in a moment, but it could literally be translated as being unchaste or sexual or licentious behavior, meaning that she was fooling around in some way that he couldn't establish with perfect certainty that it was adultery, but it was enough that he did not want to remain married to her anymore. Beit Shammai says that is the only reason for divorce. Beit Hillel, the competing school of thought and the winner of this argument and most arguments, says even if she spoiled his food, because it said ervat davar, right? It said this appalling thing, and that is an open-ended term. And Rabbi Akiva goes on to explain in a later generation, even if he found another woman prettier than her, as it is stated, if it happened that she does not find favor in his eyes, right? That finding favor in his eyes is a purely subjective thing. It could either be that he has found someone else, or that he is upset with some trivial thing that she has done, or that there is a major intimacy breach of fidelity. But Hillel and Jewish law by extension has agreed that although divorce should not be treated trivially, if it is felt to be the right decision, then divorce can be made on whatever grounds are correct. We still encourage very strongly that they seek to reconcile differences, that they seek counseling, that they seek some form of preserving the marriage if at all possible. But if it is necessary to divorce, we do not hold up a particular standard that must be met before allowing that divorce. I should point out, by the way, that that is something that was untrue in American legal life all the way up until the 60s and 70s, depending upon which state you lived in. So there are many, many ways that Judaism has been much more advanced than the American legal system, even into the 20th century.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
In the Torah, is there a verse that says that what God joins, no man separates them?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay. We definitely don't like adultery. If two people are married, a third person should not be trying to seduce one of them away. Absolutely. But there's no idea that it cannot be undone. And in fact, we are going to see that in very, 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 very rare circumstances, it can be undone even against their wishes. But that's something we'll finish off on in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
I should point out that that phrase is very common in a lot of TV weddings, as are the traditional "Do you take so and so to be your lawfully wedded wife" and all of that kind of thing. It's perfectly fine if someone wants to include that in their wedding, but that is not traditionally part of a Jewish wedding. There are no vows and promises because there is no possible way to give a list of all that we are promising to the other person when we are becoming a husband or wife. It is an open-ended obligation. It is something that will continue to reveal new joys and new responsibilities. But if somebody wants to include something that they saw from their favorite movie, do you take so and so? It can be included without invalidating the wedding. But a get, a divorce document, on the other hand, will dissolve the marriage. So the Sefer Quitut, as mentioned in Deuteronomy, is usually called a get in traditional jargon, and it must be handwritten for this purpose and for this specific couple. Great care is needed because a mistake would invalidate the divorce, which would result in adultery if they remarry someone else. So this is done very, very carefully. It is a process that takes more time than the wedding, a lot more time than the wedding to get the document prepared. But it is essential to make sure that once they are being divorced and therefore permitted to marry other people, that the original marriage is indeed truly dissolved. Now, as Deuteronomy pointed out, the process will begin with the husband. He takes the first step to initiate the giving of a get for the divorce. If he refuses and there is cause, the wife can petition the Beit Din, the court, and they can convince him to give a divorce. And by convince, I mean using all the social pressure they have to bring to bear. And prior to modern civil laws, even all the way through the Middle Ages, they would even use physical persuasion. They might beat him up to make sure that he would divorce his wife if that was what he should be doing and was refusing to do for whatever reason. For example, if he had abandoned her or was abusing her, then they would quite literally twist his arm until he did what was correct. In fact, it goes on to say, a get given under compulsion, if forced by the Jewish court, is valid. Normally, if somebody is forced to do something in Jewish law, we do not consider that to be a valid action, but in this case, we do. If it is done by non-Jews, it is invalid, meaning that if a non-Jewish person coerces you to divorce your wife for whatever bad purpose, we do not consider that to be an actual divorce. However, among the non-Jewish court, they may beat him and say, do what the Jewish court is telling you. And that is valid. So this is something that has come up a few times in America and is still bouncing through the courts with different rulings and precedent, that if a person refuses to give a divorce in modern America, after having already gotten the divorce in the civil courts, can the American civil courts force the husband to give a get? Like I said, this is still bouncing through the courts. It's not really a topic that should come up often because basically if you're getting a civil divorce, the religious Jewish divorce should be an automatic component of that. And if it's not, then you need to talk to your rabbi when you're getting a divorce to make sure that it is. And if it's not, I apologize for scaring you with a page of text, then there is a way for the court, the Jewish court, to do it anyway. I mentioned before that there is a way for the Jewish court to completely annul, to dissolve a marriage, even if the proper process of giving a get has not been followed. Let me explain by quoting from the Talmud. Rav Nachman says, a husband can void the get, he can stop the get from being valid in front of two people. Right? So he's given the get, it's being sent to his wife. Before it reaches her, he goes to two other people and says, I sent a get, but I've canceled it now. But since two people do not generate public awareness, it is possible that the wife doesn't hear, right? She doesn't know what he told two other random people, and she will go and marry. And there are mamzerim. There are then children born from what would be technically adultery, because her second marriage wouldn't be valid if the first one had not been dissolved because the husband was being a jerk by canceling the get he had already sent but not telling her. Right? Yes. Even 2,000 years ago, you shouldn't be surprised. People can be jerks when it comes to divorce. And Rav Sheshet says, in front of three. And this will generate public awareness. So she does hear and know. And she would not marry. And there is a need to institute this rule for the betterment of deserted wives, for wives that have been left in this limbo state. So his argument to how to solve this is the husband can't dissolve it unless there are three. But the sages taught, right, the general population of the rabbis taught, if he nevertheless rendered it void, it is rendered void. This is the statement of Rabbi. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says he is unable to render it void. And he also cannot add onto it his condition. For if so, what power does the court have? Right? So what Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is arguing is that if we allow the husband to send it and cancel it, send it and cancel it, send it and cancel it, basically yanking his wife, soon to be ex-wife, on a chain, then the court would look like they are powerless to prevent this abuse of the husband's power in this ceremony. So the Gemara asks, the Talmud says, well, wait a minute. Is there anything that the Torah renders, that by the Torah renders the bill of divorce void, and due to the reasoning of what power does the court have, like the court's honor is an issue, we permit a married woman to marry anyone, to marry someone else? And the Talmud answers its own question. Yes, absolutely, the court has that power. Anyone who weds a woman weds her upon the conditional will of the sages. And when one fails to conform to their will in matters of marriage and divorce, the sages uproot his marriage from him retroactively. So basically, way back when I mentioned that when someone gets married, they say, behold, you are consecrated to me by this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. That last clause, according to the laws of Moses and Israel, is not just window dressing. It is saying, if I behave in a way that is counter to the laws of Moses and Israel, when it comes time for giving a divorce, the sages technically have the authority to nullify the marriage that I am creating at that moment. So retroactively, it is as though the husband and wife were never married at all. Now, this is only used as a nuclear option, as the most extreme solution to the worst behaving husbands in the case of divorce. But it is an option to make sure that the woman is not trapped. Like I mentioned, prior to the modern world, when we administered law in our own community, we could convince a husband to take care of this issue. But since that power was taken away from us by the secular authorities, probably for the best, unfortunately, because there are secular divorces, there has been an increase in the modern world of women who have not been given their proper divorce religiously according to Jewish law. And so having this tool in our toolbox to help women who have been trapped by this interesting modern situation, it's very, very important for making sure that no one is left hanging in this kind of predicament. All right. Are there any other questions about marriage and divorce? Obviously, there's a lot more to be said, but I just wanted to make sure you had a little bit more information on all of these things. All right. I'm not seeing anything in the YouTube chat. Not hearing anything on the YouTube chat. So I will bid everyone a very good night and have a good evening. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, but not everyone was here, please make sure you vote, right? If you are a U.S. citizen, we have an election coming up. If you are in Florida, you can already begin early voting. I did it. It's very simple and very quick. So it is a Jewish responsibility, not just an American responsibility.